Did you know that traditional cattle farming practices have been criticized for their negative environment impact and animal welfare concerns? However, there's a sustainable and ethical approach to raising cattle that's gaining popularity in farming communities. Joel Salatin's method prioritizes the well-being of the cattle, the health of the land, and the quality of the meat produced. In this episode, we'll explore the key principles of Salatin's method, including prioritizing soil health using rotational grazing techniques and promoting grass-fed beef benefits. By following these principles, we can support sustainable agriculture and create a more ethical and environmentally friendly food system. Whether you're a farmer or consumer, join us as we discover the secret to raising healthy cattle in a sustainable way. Let's get growing. Hello, and welcome to the Pray Just Plant podcast, the show that talks about growing a garden, a homestead, a healthy family, and most importantly, growing closer to God. I'm your host, Crystal Media, owner of the Red Ridge Farm Homestead, where our mission is to help women of faith find the courage to grow healthy food for their family while building a closer relationship with our Lord and Savior. That's you. Don't let the world hold you back. Pray Just Plant. Hello, fellow growers, and welcome to the Pray Just Plant podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Media, and today in Season 10, Episode 12, we're going to dive into cattle, and we're going to talk about different ways, or a secret way, may not be secret to you, but a way that Joel Salatin has coined in raising healthy cattle. A way that not only raises healthy cattle, but also takes care of the land, takes care of the soil. Because we are, even though we are maybe grow animals or grow a garden, we are as growers, stewards of the soil. The soil is what gives us the produce and the products that we consume every day. We sometimes forget about that, but I think the soil is the foundation of everything that we consume and eat on earth. So why not find a way that we can raise cattle and raise that beef for our table in a way that is good for the land and good for the cow and good for us, because in result of a good, happy cow is more nutrient dense, good tasting beef. So let's dive into this topic. The first part is thinking of our soil first. One of the core principles of Joel Salatin's cattle farming method is soil health. This means treating the soil as a living organism that needs to be nurtured rather than just a substrate for plants to grow in. Salatin believes that healthy soil leads to healthy plants and healthier animals, which in turn produces healthier meat. Prioritize soil health, Salatin rotates his cattle between fields, allows the land to rest and regenerate between grazing sessions. This ensures that the soil is not depleted of nutrients or overrun with pests and allows for the diverse range of plant species to grow. By using rotational grazing techniques, farmers can also reduce the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides, furthermore promoting soil health. By prioritizing our soil health, farmers can create a sustainable farming system. I truly believe that all farmers think of the soil first, but sometimes we have different methods or different ways that we do things. And sometimes those ways may seem good to you, but not good to other people, or may seem what you think is good for the soil, but maybe really isn't. But sometimes that's the way we are taught. I personally have been taught to raise cattle in a certain way here in Wyoming. We open up a pasture, they stay in that pasture for so many amount of days, and then they maybe move to a different pasture if we have that area. But normally you purchase the amount of animals that you have for the amount of land you have, and you let them free range. You let them do what cows do, which is still good for cows, but that's not good for the soil. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more deeply. Let's go into that rotational grazing techniques a little bit deeper. Instead of allowing cattle to graze freely on the field until it's completely depleted, farmers rotate their livestock between different fields. Now, this can be done in many different ways. You can go to Joel Salatin, where he rotates them twice a day. You can look at Greg Judy that rotates at a different style. But the most important thing is that you are giving the soil and the grass time to rest. This can seem like as something that is overwhelming. I know I have felt this because I grew up raising my cattle free range. That means they can graze all they want. But what rotational grazing does is it gives the soil and the grass time to rest. And that resting time is what gives it time to regrow, time to bring in more nutrients, time to rebuild itself, time to protect the plant, and rejuvenate between the grazing sessions. This can help with the grass in one not being stripped down to the ground in some places. So what happens in free range grazing? Well, it kind of an example, and I think Joel Salatin uses this a little bit, but an example that I like to use is you as a family go to a all-you-can-eat buffet, right? And us as adults, we sometimes when we go to a buffet, we are kind of not very health conscious, right? We want to go to the things we like the best. Well, as for kids, that's like they go to the candy, right? They want to eat whatever you make them eat so that they can go to the ice cream buffet and so on and so forth. Well, the same thing happens with cows. They like certain grasses that are a little bit more tasty and more palatable for them. And what they will do is if they are not blocked away from them, they'll go to that grass, they'll eat it to the ground, and then they'll leave and go eat other grasses that they like. And then probably within 2 or 3 days, they're back to, or even less than that, or more than that. I'm not a cow and I don't know exactly how long, but usually when they see that grass coming up again, they trim it down because it's their favorite. And usually if you were on the other side of a buffet restaurant, you know that desserts go out the window like crazy and that Brussels sprouts don't, because there's not very many people that love Brussels sprouts. So I think you can see the analogy there that those cows will keep returning to the dessert station. They'll keep returning to those plants, and those plants will never have a time to rest. And then the things that they don't eat, and usually those are weeds or things that you don't want growing on your property, they flourish because the cows aren't eating them. They are getting even more soil because as the cows overeat the things that they do like, they're being depleted and they disappear, and that gives more room for the things that they don't like to grow. And then you have to reseed your pasture, or you have to maybe bring in permaculture. You can bring in another animal. That's what we've done here on the homestead to help with that if you can't get into a rotational grazing. But rotational grazing is so important because what it does is you need minimum maximum time of rest for certain products, certain plants to grow back so that they not only grow themselves up, but they also have time to put energy into their root system and grow and expand. Another thing that rotational grazing happens, especially when you use Joel Salatin's method of mob grazing, you are creating a smaller place for them to come into, and they cut it all evenly like a lawnmower would. And they're eating everything. They're not going to be picky because they have the competition between someone else. So you know when there's a bunch of people and they want to eat, say, this cake, or maybe they want to eat the Brussels sprouts and they're competing, I'm thinking of my kids, or maybe it's something else like their plate of supper, and the first person who gets done gets to go play on their games first. So they eat everything and they really don't think about what they're eating. They just focus on eating and they have that competitive mindset. And the same happens with cattle. They will not necessarily compete, but that competitive mindset will be there. And if you, of course, are going to be providing all the food that they need during that rotation. But what it does is it trims down everything. So now those cows are eating the things that they are not disgusting to them or not harmful to them, but it's not their favorite. But they're still eating it. They're getting it done. They're getting it out of the way. And so they can lay down and chew their cud and be done and be ready for the next move onto new fresh grass. And there's nothing like seeing cattle moved out on fresh grass. They love it. It's like their favorite day or favorite time of the day if you rotate every day. We are working on systems to try to rotate every day, but it's hard with our property because we are not on some of our properties every day. So we have to travel to them and we have certain guidelines. But if you follow the proper times of rest, you can still work in systems where you don't have to do it every single day. You need to at least do it every 3 days because that's when a cow will come back and trim down the grass and kill that species that they really love. So as long as you're doing something like that, you're still giving that plant enough time to rest. If you work out a system that cow does not come back to that area for 21 is the very minimum, very, very minimum. It's every land, every territory, every terrain, not territory, has different growth systems, but you don't want to be shorter than 21 days ever. You want to get that mark up to like 40 days, 45 days. That's the prime place. So if you can rotate to where that cow or that mob of cattle do not come back to that grass for that amount of time is going to give that grass time to grow and mature, not quite mature to the end, but regrow, feed its roots, and create a great product for your animals to consume. Now, doing this is also going to help with like what I talked about before. If we are needing to reseed something or re-fertilize or do certain things because the cattle are overgrazing, but then also use herbicides because the cattle are undergrazing in another area, we can divert those negative impacts by just creating systems like this rotational grazing or mob grazing that will take care of it. And if you look at it, it's less work, right? It's less work because cattle are naturally roaming animals like the buffalo. The buffalo did this naturally in the environment. They would graze down what they ate and they would just keep moving on. They would keep rotating and moving through their migration, and by the time they came back, the grass was grown back. This is the same thing that's happening here, but when we put fences around a property, we can't let the cattle move as far away as they would want to, especially if we have water restrictions, than say buffalo would in the open prairie. So we have to create those boundaries so that we create, in a way, a rotation or a migration naturally. And we're going to get into the next benefits in a moment, but right now it is time for the tips and tricks segment of this episode, where I share with you a seasonal tip or trick that I'm using right now at the Red Ridge Farm Homestead to help me first grow, but I know it will help you because it is something that is beneficial for you, the soil, and more. This week's tip is brought to you by the Planning Beyond the Harvest handbook. This handbook was designed to help you get your harvest onto your family's plates. We grow all this delicious food, and sometimes in the garden planning, we forget about the harvest and beyond the harvest. This workbook will walk you through the 5 steps that I use to get beyond the harvest. You can grab your copy at redridgefarm.org/resources. We are now in the full swing of garden season, and you are probably fighting a bane that we all have, and that's weeds. My tip for you this week is that you can use different organic methods to control your weeds, and one of the most simple organic method is just your time. Make a schedule of going out to your garden either once a day or 3 times a week to weed. When you can catch those weeds when they're little, they're very simple to handle. Another thing that is great in the garden for weeds, especially in the paths, is mulch. And maybe there's a bed that you aren't planting yet. Don't leave it to go fallow. Plant some cover crops, or better yet, if you only have a week or so before you need to plant in that bed again, use a tool that is called solarization. This is where you're just not letting the sun reach the soil. The soil still, the microorganisms are still going to be able to do all their things that they need to do, but the sun is not going to reach those weed seeds. And if the weed seeds do come up, they're going to be stunted because they just don't get the sun that they need to create chlorophyll to grow. So use solarization if you're not ready to plant in that bed just yet. So my tip for you this week is that everyone battles weeds, but there's ways that you can combat them. And the easiest way is to attack them when they're young. So one of the biggest things that consumers, I think this is from the consumer side, worry about is like labels on their meat, right? Antibiotic, hormones. Are they using these things in our meat? Why are we worried about it? Well, they have residues that can stay in the meat that we can affect us. one of the biggest things is if we're growing our animals where they're healthy, we wouldn't need to use those things, right? And one of the healthiest ways to grow a cow is on grass. That's where they were intended to grow. God intended them to be grazers. They grow on grass. God didn't intend them to be put in smaller areas with a bunch of cows and kept in confinement or kept in the same pastures all the time. Because they have to be able to not only just keep grazing the same food, but they got to be able to get away from their poo. They got to be able to get away from the pests that grow in their poop, like the flies and all of those things, so that we can promote a natural immunity in cows. We can promote a resilient herd in the long term. We can avoid antibiotics to treat illness. And farmers don't need to use hormones because the cows are growing naturally the best way that they can. And I think that this is one thing that I really learned from Joel Salatin, which I've never really worried about this, because as a cattle farmer from way back, because my dad was in the cattle industry, we never used hormones. Hormones were, I was like, how does hormones get in our meat? Well, that's a different industry. In the cattle, that is where they're going to feedlots and they're being given different feed, not raised on grass. All my beef have been raised on grass. We did a cow pair herds that we raised and my dad managed. So we've never dealt with that side. And antibiotics, the only time you have to use antibiotics, you don't use them all the time. If you have your animals out on clean grass and they're not cooped up and put under pressure and stress, because pressure is stress, that's what causes sickness. You don't need to use them. You might have an occasional animal that might have a cut on his foot or something like that you would use antibiotics. But you yourself, you don't use antibiotics every day. You only use them when you're sick. And if you eat healthy food and you have a not stress-free. I don't think there's ever stress-free, but if you have a less stressed life, you're going to be healthier. You're going to feel better. You're going to eat all of those things. Well, the same goes with our animals. The same goes with the farming industry. When we create a system that comes off of nature, we create a system that is less stress, and cattle are doing what cows were intended to do. Another book I just thought of that Joel Salatin wrote, The Pigginess of a Pig. Well, he talks about the same thing with the cows, the cowness of the cow. Cows are intended to graze, to migrate, to move along away from the pests, and all of those things. And you can easily avoid sickness by rotational grazing. One of the other things that can cause sickness in cows is flies and the buzzing insects that can bite them. Well, if you naturally are moving your cows away from the poo, those larvae don't develop into flies until I think it's 5 days later. If they're not there, then those cows won't be bugged by the flies. The flies don't have the strength to fly all the way over to the cows, so you're creating a system that is even more helpful. And if you incorporate chickens, in the last chapters of the Salad Bar Beef of Joel Salatin's book, talks about incorporating birds into this system. Because if you bring birds in 3 days after the cows, they claw through those cow pies and they eat the fly larvae, and there's no more flies because the flies are being eaten up. There might be a few that will fly around, but you can't get rid of all the insects. But you're going to reduce that a lot, and you're definitely going to be keeping your animals away from the things that can make them sick. So I think this system is really great to help keep our animals healthy. And a healthy animal equals healthier, more nutrient-dense food and healthier cells. We are what we eat, which goes into our next topic, grass-fed beef benefits. Aside from the positive impact of sustainable farming practices on the environment and animals' welfare, grass-fed beef also offers numerous benefits for consumers. Compared to conventionally raised beef, grass-fed beef tends to have less fat and more nutrients, including antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. Additionally, the meat is leaner and has a distinct flavor that many people find appealing. Because grass-fed beef cattle are allowed to graze and and move freely, their meat is generally lower in saturated fats and higher in omega-3 fatty acids. These healthy fats are associated with the reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, and other health problems. Grass-fed beef also contains higher levels of leonic acid. I hope I'm saying that right. A type of fatty acid that has been linked to reducing inflammation and improving metabolism. So there's lots of benefits to consuming grass-fed. And if you are a consumer of grass-fed beef, then you know that the fat is a little bit different than what you get at your normal restaurant or you see in the grocery aisles. It is a yellow color, and that yellow color is that nutrients from the grass or that you can visually see in that fat. You can also see that the fat is thinner. There's not as much fat on that beef as well. And so all of that comes with the natural way that God intended grass-fed animals or ruminants to eat. Grain has only been around in the quantities to feed animals for a short time. If you go back to the old homesteaders and chickens, and you think about chickens and pigs, they eat nowadays. They are fed only grains, but that's not the way it used to be. They were actually animals that were used on the homestead, used on the farm to get rid of waste. Chickens naturally clean up old vegetables, naturally clean up around the yard. They would run around and kill insects, and maybe they might get some grains naturally from the grass, but they weren't intentionally fed grain. The same with pigs. They were fed slop. They were fed the natural waste of the home and the homestead, and they thrived on it. It has only been in this day and age when we are trying to really bring animals up to weight fast, bring animals up to gain fast, that we are utilizing grain. Also, the grain is more prevalent than it was back then. Think about the reasons this was more prevalent. Back when I'm talking about, you had to cut your wheat by hand. You had to do all the 5 or 6 things: cutting, drying, beating, and then they getting the shaft stuff off of it, and then grinding. All those 5 things to make flour yourself. Or you had to go to a mill or something like that. That was a lot of hard work. You weren't going to waste that grain giving it to an animal. You were going to consume it yourself. But as technology, as industry has moved forward in agriculture, we have now machines that do all of those things. So we can produce more grain. So then that means that our animals are getting it. Does that mean that the animals need it? No. And do you think I'm against feeding grain? No. I think there's certain times and situations that grain can be a huge asset. Personally, I like a grain-finished beef, but not a grain-grown beef. So grain-finished beef is just a beef that only has been on a grain, and usually I use corn, for the last 30 days. So their whole life they've been on grass, and only that last 30 days. And what that last 30 days does is it just takes the color out of that fat. The nutrients are still there, and it makes it a little bit more white. It isn't as fatty as extremely grain-fed animals, but that's just how I like to consume it. But grass-fed is also very nutritious, and I fully believe that last 30 days isn't that big of deal when it comes to nutrients. It's not going to change the nutrients completely. The meat is going to still have the omega fatty acids that it needs. It's going to have all of those nutrients. But the best way to find out about this is just to talk to your producers. Talk to them about how they raise their beef. And in the way that we do it is, they're out on grass for 18 months of their life, and that last month they're on grass but have given a little grain treat in the morning. So, and it's not a large amount. It only takes a little bit to change that fat into a white color, just to make it a little bit more palatable and maybe relieve that little bit of taste that some people enjoy in grass-fed beef. It's really important that you think about all of the aspects of ways to grow beef. I think the biggest thing that I learned from Joel Salatin's book, Salad Bar Beef, was about the change in taking care of the land. Taking care of the land as well as taking care of the cow, so that we can create that permaculture, create that system that takes care of all 3 parts: the land, the animal, and ourselves. But now it is time for the Growing with God segment of this episode, where you and I dive into the Bible and learn more about our walk and the words of God. This week we're continuing our short little break series on fearing the Lord, Deuteronomy 10:12 through 13, and how we can meditate on the words of God. Or last time we talked about fearing the Lord your God. So I'm going to read those 2 verses again, and we're going to dive into the next part of that 4 parts that God asks us to do for Him. And if you didn't listen last week, this is out of Deuteronomy. Now, Deuteronomy is the speech that Moses is giving to the Israelites before they're about to go into the promised land. He's going through all their instructions. He's going through that you need to make safe cities and that you need to follow the commands. And these are all the commands and how you should treat widows and how you should treat orphan children and all the things on what they should be doing in the promised land. And this is what one of the things he said. This is in Deuteronomy 10:12 through 13. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him, to love Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I'm giving you today for your own good. So last time we talked about fear the Lord, and we talked about how that was respect, how fear is not us shaking in our shoes or in fear of something, but out of respect, seeing God's power, seeing who God is, and that God is who He says He is. And therefore, if God is just, then the words of God are just, and that the words of God are truth, and the words of God are the beginning and the end, because that is who God is. The next one is to walk in obedience to Him. How is obedience different than serve? Because that was the other thing, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart. Well, let's look at the word obedience and let's break it apart. We're going to meditate on this verse just a little bit. And that's what I want to encourage you to do. You need to think about the Word of God, not just in your prayer time, not just in your Bible time, but in any moments of the day. How can you apply this verse to your day? How can you take moments and maybe we are reading this part of the Bible, think back to Deuteronomy and how does that affect it? How does that change how you see what God is trying to tell you? So let's look at the word obedience in the Bible. When we talk about respect and fear, we see who God is. We see that He is powerful, that He is just. In obedience, it's not just what we do or doing the thing that's asked of us. Obedience, actually, the dictionary of it is compliance with order, request, or law, or submission to another authority. Obedience isn't just doing what's asked of us. It's doing it with compliance and a submissive heart. That's different than serving, isn't it? And we're going to get into that in another Bible study on this topic. So let's break down obedience. So obedience is compliance. It's doing what God asks us to do, yes, without question, but also with trust, with submission, with compliance. We're doing it because we accept who God is. We accept that His Bible is just because first, right, we fear God, we respect Him, we see that who He is who He is, and we trust in that who He is, and that obedience follows because if you trust in who God is, then you can easily submit to an all-powerful God because you trust in what He is saying, because you fear Him. All ties together. So obedience to God in the Bible relates to hearkening or hearing to a higher authority. Obedience is an act of surrender. It's when we as Christians say, not my will, Lord, but your will, and align our actions with that will. James 1:22 through 25 says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away, at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and the preserving, being no hearer who forgot, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. God is asking us to not just hear his word, not just to acknowledge that sound happen. So I was listening to a preacher this week, and he talked about the difference between hearing and listening. And hearing, he said that the dictionary says that hearing is just that you heard the sound. You heard the tree fall over. You heard the birds tweet. You heard the crickets. But listening is when you give attention to that. When you turn your head and you maybe close your eyes and listen to the cricket song. That's listening. And when we look at that with the word obedience, what we're doing is not only do we see, right, the fear, we see that God is who he is, but that we surrender to that power and we surrender to what he says, and not only hear what he says, but we act on what he says. We listen to what he says. We bring his words into us so that we can become doers. And in that doing, we submit. We are compliant to who God is and what he asks of us. Isn't that amazing how those two different parts, fearing God and being obedient to God, are intertwined with each other? And that verse in James really talks about that we are only fooling ourselves when we just hear the word of God and not truly listen to the word of God. Because Matthew 7:24 through 27 also says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. This is Jesus speaking. And the rain fell and the floods came. When we are obedient, we are submitting to a one and powerful God. We are doing what he says. He says, build your house on the rock. Do not build it on the sand. When we take his words as truth and we act upon them, that is when we are obedient. That is different than just service. That is different than love. That is different than fear. That's why there are 4 different parts of this verse. So I'm going to read this verse one more time. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. I just want you to think about this week in a way, or what is something that you can do. Maybe you feel that you're too busy, or that you don't understand, or you wish you had more time to read the Bible, or you haven't been to a church in a while, but you feel that urge to go. But that means that you have to change your schedule, or you have to change something about you. In obedience to God, that means that we submit to him. We need to submit our time. We need to submit our to-do list. We need to submit and find compliance in him and do the things that he asks us to do. You can't be too busy for God. If you're too busy for God, then you are too busy. So just think of something this week that can help you pull closer to God. Create that lasting relationship with him by showing him the respect that an all-powering God deserves, and submit to him the things that are weighing on your heart. Maybe the simplest thing you can do is just pray and be humble in your prayer. So we've talked about many aspects of the book Salad Bar Beef by Joel Salatin. And I just want to hit on a few more things that has really impacted the way I grow our beef here at the Red Ridge Farmstead. Another important aspect of raising healthy cattle in a sustainable way is supporting sustainable agriculture practices. This means taking steps to minimize the negative impact that farming has on the environment while also maintaining the health and well-being of the animal. You as a consumer choose to support things with your money. You, as maybe a producer, maybe you're growing your own beef. Maybe you're thinking about different ways that you can grow it and you want to save money, or you want to be able to still create a very healthy product for your family, as well as protect the land that you're growing that on. You are supporting sustainable agriculture, especially as a consumer. We choose to spend our money on the things that we are supporting. And I think that is very important in this day and age, that we need to think about the way we spend our money. If we go to a store and we're not treated with respect, and we are looked down upon, or we are condescended to, but the prices there are really cheap, is that the store that we should be giving our money to? Because personally, I don't think it is. Personally, that means the management there at that store is not teaching their employees to be friendly. If they can't even be friendly to the people giving them money, how do you think they deal with life with the money that they do make? Are they contributing to charities? Are they giving to the local economy? How is that company supporting the people around it if they can't even train their employees to be nice to their customers? There's many other things that annoy me about stores, that I choose to spend my money in certain stores because of how the people treat me, because of the products that they provide, and because of who they are as a company. So you have to be thinking about that too with the food that you grow and the food that you consume. You need to support people that want to create sustainable agriculture and reduce food waste. One key way to support sustainable agriculture is by choosing to purchase products from local farmers who use environmentally friendly methods. By doing so, you can help reduce your carbon footprint and support the local economy. You can also look for products that are certified organic or produced using methods that have been certified as sustainable. Another way to support sustainable agriculture is by reducing your food waste. Personally, this means only buying the amount of food that you need and using up leftovers instead of throwing them away. You can also donate excess food to local food banks or compost it to create nutrient-rich soil for your garden. There's many ways that we can support sustainable agriculture, and there's many ways that we as growers, we as homesteaders, even though we don't have lots of land, and I know we're talking about cows that need a little bit more, there's many ways that you can create sustainable agriculture on your little bit of homestead. And I think that's what I learned most from the book Salad Bar Beef. I went into this book wanting to learn more about regenerative agriculture. I wanted to learn more about rotational grazing, and I got all of that answered. But it also hit me on the other side of me as a consumer, because my money talks for me. My money supports the things that I think are valuable. But what if you don't realize that? What if your money is going towards something that is completely against who you are as a person? So we as a consumer need to use our money to vote. We need not necessarily vote, but use our money to stand up for the things that we feel are right, and also stand up for the things that we feel are wrong. We don't need to give our money to people that aren't taking care of the earth, aren't creating a sustainable environment. And that comes to when we buy stuff for our homesteads too. We need to be thinking about those things. So I hope this episode has really helped you see that there are different ways that you can raise cattle. Joel Salatin's Salad Bar Beef method offers a sustainable and ethical approach to raising healthy cattle, prioritizing soil health, implementing rotational grazing techniques, avoiding antibiotics and hormones, and producing grass-fed beef are key principles that benefit both the environment and the quality of meat produced. By supporting sustainable agriculture, we can create a more ethical and environmental friendly food system, whether you're a farmer or a consumer. Choosing Salad Bar Beef is a step towards a healthier and more sustainable future. As Salatin would say, let the cows be cows and let the land be land. I want to thank you for joining me here at the Pray to Plant podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you would like to dive in deeper to learn more about raising cattle or more about the purposeful growing journey, this is a journey that I feel all homesteaders go through. It's the 6 stages. And this episode, we're talking about the homestead stage in raising beef. Then please check out the Purposeful Growing Journey webpage, where I have walked through each of these steps. I give you action steps. I help you define what stage you are in and more. The stages are Just Grow, where you find your goals, Purposeful Kitchen, where you're learning to cook from scratch and creating purpose in your kitchen, Purposeful Home, you're finding the systems that will help you grow more, Purposeful Garden, you're growing your fruits and vegetables, Purposeful Homestead, you're adding animals, Purposeful Life is where you're bringing everything together to creating the sustainable life that you want for you and your family. So please jump over and check out that page and find out what stage you are in. And as always, don't let the world hold you back. Pray, just plant.